Okay guys, so here we go. We're going to begin your Roman review. This will be study for your test. So first thing we're going to look at is the beginning of Rome, how Rome was founded. Now, if you guys remember from last time, we were dealing with the Mediterranean area with Greece. Now if you look over here, we have Greece. Now Greece was very different from Rome. Now Greece was, they had all these little islands over here which made them really good for sailing. They were great sailors with their triremes. Okay, especially Athens. But Rome was different. Rome was a peninsula, which means it had water on three sides. Okay, all three sides we have water. Now Rome was in Italy. You have to remember though, even though Rome was in Italy, it was not really Italy. There were no Italians. It was a place called Italia, where Rome was a city-state. So we have no Italians, no pasta, and no "it's-a-me, Mario." Okay, remember Nathan, no Mario yet. Okay, what we have here is a city of Rome, full of Romans, right, in a peninsula. Now, if you also remember that their land was much better, they were better able to farm, and they had less protection though than the Greeks. The Greeks had a really hilly mountain. The Romans in here did not, but they had very good farmland, and because of that they were able to better live and didn't have to trade the same way that the Greeks did. So that's pretty much what we're going to be dealing with for Rome. Now we're going to deal with the founding. So if you guys remember, Rome was founded by two brothers, Romulus and Remus. But before we get to them, we have to go back to the Trojan War. Now the Trojan War was between the Greeks and the Trojans. And if you remember right, we had Aeneas, who was a nephew or cousin of King Priam, who was the king of Troy. And what ended up happening with him was that when the Greeks broke in and destroyed Troy by coming in and sneaking in through the wooden horse, what we ended up having was Troy getting burnt to the ground. And Aeneas managed to escape with a whole bunch of other Trojans, and together they founded an area called Alba Longa. And once they found Alba Longa, then we go on, a couple of generations pass, and we get Romulus and Remus. And with Romulus and Remus, they were abandoned, even though that they were supposed to be, very important to the future of Rome. They were abandoned, but they were found by a she-wolf. And the she-wolf nursed them back to health until they were healthy enough to survive. They were founded by a shepherd, they grew old, and then did what all siblings do. Alexandra and Winston, you guys know all about this, even Alessandro, they got into fights. Brutal fights. In fact, these two fought so badly that they fought to be king of what would be Rome. Romulus and Remus fought, and in the end, Romulus wins, which is why we end up having the city called Rome, not Rheims. What you guys also need to remember is that the beginning of Rome, we have Romulus, who is the first king of Rome in 753 BC. After several generations, they get some really bad rulers in there, and the people overthrow it, and Rome becomes a republic. And it's a republic for a really long time. Senators were able to vote, they made decisions, people elected the senators, they were representing the people. And then what you ended up having was Julius Caesar shows up, and he becomes dictator for life, and he creates a society where he's basically made himself king. And senators really don't like it, and because of that they kill him. So now we're going to be looking at Roman society. So the first guy we're going to be looking at are the Patricians. Now you guys need to remember that these are the descendants of the most ancient and noble, powerful families in Rome. They had great villas, really fancy, swanky houses, and these were the guys with the big political power. They had most of the power in the Senate, and for them, marriage was also something that was really big. The idea was patricians would marry other patricians. The reason why is when you got married, there was a dowry, which means your future wife's parents would pay you money to take their daughter off their hands. So by doing that, you would want to try and get more wealth. And the more wealth you got, the more powerful you could be. The more powerful you were, the more plebeians you could have. Plebeians were helpful because they helped the patricians gain power. Now remember, plebeians were artisans or peasants who worked the patricians' land. These guys lived in apartments, and if you were really lucky, you could become the client of a patrician, which was kind of like a really good servant, but you would get paid. So plebeians would offer their services building pots or making olive oil, and in return they got protection from the patrician family, who became their patron. So this was a really good deal, and in return they would vote when the senator was up for election. Now we go through different groups. We're going to go through the hierarchy now. You guys need to remember that hierarchy is the triangle. So the first guy we're going to be looking at is the Emperor of Rome. So he was the head of society and ruler of all Rome. Augustus was the first emperor of Rome, and he established a standing Roman army, a network of roads, and rebuilt much of the city of Rome. And what's really important about him was he really set up a period of peace called the Pax Romana, which was a long period of peace, and most emperors who followed after Augustus spent most of their time trying to be as good a ruler as Augustus was. Augustus' name means the greatest, and that was a name bestowed on him by the Senate. So this guy was really important to Roman society, and he really set up the future of how Rome would be seen after the Republic ended. The next guys we're going to be looking at are the senators. Senators were really important. They served in the Senate and governed Rome. Only Roman citizens over the age of 25 with military and administrative experience could be senators. You needed to make sure that you were, had experience in both army life and in the running of a city. So you had to, have a job as either a censor, which was a guy who counted how many people, or a tax collector, or other jobs. Now we're going to move on to the Patrician families. These guys were wealthy, influential landowning families, and these families provided the empire with political, religious, and military leadership. Now you have to remember that their names, like we said before, pater means father, and these guys were seen as the father of the Roman people in the sense that they provided all the military leadership. These were the guys who would be consuls. These were the guys who would lead the army and different religious aspects of Rome. They were key. The next group we have were the Equestrians. These guys were the wealthy property owners who chose business over politics. Now the big thing that happened is after the assassination of Julius Caesar, Augustus came back and pretty much arrested and killed all the senators that were responsible for his adopted father's death. And because of that, the senatorial rank was pretty thin. There really weren't a lot of senators left. So what happened was that Augustus pretty much filled the senatorial class with equestrians. Now we're going to go on to the plebeians. These guys were the working class men, didn't have a lot of money, they worked for a living, jobs like artisans, craftsmen, bakers, and what was really difficult for them in Roman society, and the reason why they couldn't gain a lot of power, is because they couldn't read or write. This really limited them. These guys could never become senators, never really gain power. Guys who could gain wealth, though, and a lot of it, were the freed slaves. Now, the advantage of being a freed slave was that you really weren't shackled anymore, except for by the hat you had to wear to show that you were a freed slave. Now, these guys had either been given their freedom, or they had paid for it with money that they had earned themselves as slaves. Now, once you were free, former slaves could work in the same job as plebeians, craftsmen and traders, and some even really did become quite rich. But at the same time, you still were not able to take part in political life. You weren't allowed to vote. You were limited in what you could do. Most slaves did not become wealthy. And now we go on to the regular slaves. These guys had a raw deal. Mostly they were prisoners of war, sometimes abandoned children, and these guys were owned by their masters. Their owners could kill them for anything and face no punishment, although this was not usually a good idea because a dead slave still costs money in the sense that now you have no one to clean up after your house. Well, I hope this helps you guys study for your test, and good luck on Roman society. Take care.